First Person Advisors is now a subsidiary of NFP, the fifth largest insurance broker in the world, combining local expertise with access to global capabilities and solutions. Learn more at firstpersonadvisors.com.
The Gambinos. No crime family in America has been as powerful, as wealthy, or as treacherous.
He put a member of the Gambino mob in prison, then convicted one of the main men behind the Oklahoma City bombing.
The jury has sent word that they do have a verdict. Good. Count one, guilty. Terry Nichols is guilty.
So how did Geoffrey Mearns go from one of the nation's top trial lawyers to the man in charge at a major Indiana university?
President Mearns, it gives me great pleasure to affirm your welcome to Ball State University and declare officially that you are now the 17th president of Ball State University. Congratulations.
You know you're a Ball State Cardinal when you're one of us. We are Ball State University. We fly.
Geoffrey Mearns, the wind beneath the wings at Ball State, a guy who runs like the wind, broke a record held by legendary marathoner Frank Shorter, qualified for the '84 Olympic trials. High-powered prosecutor, dynamic runner, high school teacher, one of 9 kids, and now blazing a trail in higher education. Get to know Ball State University President Geoff Mearns on this edition of the Business and Beyond podcast. Hello and welcome to the Business and Beyond podcast presented by PNC. I'm Gary Dick. Geoffrey Mearns' journey to Muncie, Indiana to lead Ball State University is anything but typical. He was born in Charlottesville, Virginia, one of 9 kids, spent his high school years in the Cleveland suburb of Shaker Heights, where Mearns' mom served as mayor. He graduated with an English degree from Yale and then went on to teach high school English in New Jersey. Mearns eventually earned a law degree and wound up working some very high-profile cases. He helped send Gambino crime family member Sammy the Bull Gravano to jail and was on the prosecution team that sent Terry Nichols to prison for his role in the Oklahoma City bombing. After 15 years practicing law, Mearns entered the world of higher education. He was named Ball State's 17th president in 2017, and I am very happy to have Geoff Mearns join me on the podcast this week. President Mearns, thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you very much for having me on your podcast.
Yeah, you know, as I was doing a little research for the podcast, you're coming up on 5 years, is that right?
That's correct. It'll be 5 years in the middle of May.
That is amazing. I mean, I remember very clearly when you were named president. I know you came on the show. It doesn't seem like it's been 5 years. What does it seem like to you?
Yeah, so there's some days when it seems, with COVID years, you can't tell whether that makes your lifespan longer or shorter, but I still have that same level of enthusiasm and really the same level of excitement and optimism about the future of our university and the future of the communities that we serve here in East Central Indiana.
Yeah. Tell me about the pandemic. Obviously, extremely challenging times to be a university president, to be sure. Do you think it seemed like you're on the downside of the pandemic now and maybe the worst is behind us?
Yeah, I do. And clearly on our campus, the numbers have dropped significantly over the last month or so. And like everyone else, we've faced a couple of waves and feel that our faculty, staff, and our students really managed their way through it. It's about the 2-year anniversary when we had to send everyone in remote instruction back in March of 2020. What to me is a remarkable statistic that from March of 2020 through December of 2021, we conferred 10,000 degrees here at Ball State. That is, we were able to continue through the hard work of our faculty, the dedication of our staff, and the discipline and persistence of our students. They were able to complete their education, and we have now thousands of students still along the pipeline. So I think that statistic is a reflection of how well we've managed this extraordinary crisis.
Geoff, it had to have tested your every bit of your leadership abilities, to work through this. How would you describe? Were there any moments that you thought, man, I don't know how we're going to get through this?
Well, there were times when I was wondering whether we'd be able to sustain on-campus instruction, but I'll tell you a little anecdote. This was probably, late April of 2020. So we were 6-8 weeks into it. None of us knew how long it was going to be. And I had a rare Sunday afternoon in the spring, and I was walking my dog with my wife, Jennifer, and I was kind of lamenting, kind of as your question suggests. And I said to her, I'm not sure I really signed up for this.
Right.
And Jennifer, who's always the one who brings me back to ground, reminded me that only a few months earlier in January 2020, the board had extended my contract for several years. So she said, well, literally, actually, you did sign up for this.
Right.
And I said, well, that's not quite what I meant. And what she said, which was a great reminder, is, this is a test of leadership. When you sign up in a position like this, you sign up for the good times and the celebrations, and you sign up for the challenges as well. And I've been so fortunate, Gary, because I had a team around me on the leadership team, and that includes our deans and department chairs, our vice presidents. Every one of them stepped up in extraordinary ways. And if I can tell you one other story, just to illustrate what I mean. In August, when we returned to classes in August of 2020, the pandemic was still kicking around pretty badly. In the first week or two of classes, we had an extraordinary spike in new infections among our students. And we were very close to having to do what our colleagues did at Notre Dame, to shut down in-person instruction for a while. We decided to see if we could get our arms around the infections on our campus. And so we mobilized testing and contact tracing, and we needed to set up an auxiliary testing site at our football stadium. And we needed somebody to manage that auxiliary facility. And so we were in a daily meeting with the leadership team, and I looked around the table. I said, who can take this on? And the person who stepped up was Beth Getz, our athletics director. So here's our director of intercollegiate athletics, who said to us, look, I know all of you are busy. We're in a pause in competitive sports rights now. I can take this on. And so our athletic director spent 16 hours a day for nearly 2 weeks running our testing center that helped us get our arms around it. I mean, just one example of hundreds of stories that I could tell you about people who went above and beyond what was in their job description. And so we managed through it because of these extraordinary people. And I'm so fortunate to be a part of that team.
Yeah, that is a great story. And Beth Getz certainly is making her mark as an athletic director there at Ball State, far beyond Muncie. A lot of people recognizing her ability there. You talk about, the good times and the bad times. Being the president of Ball State University, you get to do some fun stuff, especially with guys like Dave Letterman. What's it been like to get to know David Letterman? Because obviously he's been such a wonderful benefactor for Ball State, but has supported the university in so many ways. And I know you've done some cool events with him.
Yeah, he's been a remarkable and fun graduate to have back on our campus. He came back here, as you may recall, with Peyton Manning in the fall of 2020 to record an episode of Peyton's Places, Peyton Manning's fun take on football, and got our players involved in that show. Great way to showcase it. He was on campus just a few weeks ago to announce a new program with our esports program. The Ray Hall Letterman Lanigan racing team is investing in our new esports program and providing scholarships. And what's interesting about him when he's on campus, Gary, he's always very polite and is willing to spend a few minutes with me. He spends his time on our campus with our students. He comes back to be with them. And again, I'll tell you one story. We were involved. We had to keep the number of people who were in the esports venue under control. And there were about 3 or 4 dozen students out in the hallway. And I went out to speak with them, and they said, hey, is there any chance that you could get David Letterman to come out, take a group photo with us? So I said, well, let me go see. So I went back inside and I said to him, David, there's a group of students. So not only did he say yes, he walked out there and he looked at the crowd. He said, look, we can't do a group photo in this hallway. Let's do them one at a time.
Wow.
And he spent about 45 minutes talking to each one of these students and taking a selfie with them. That's the kind of committed graduate he is. that he wants to be here for our students. And we're so fortunate to have him whenever he's on campus. It's great to have him here.
That is a great story. Okay, so nearly 5 years on the job now. I mean, this is an unfair question. I was going to say, how would you describe your first 5 years in one word? But give me a phrase. Is there a phrase or a descriptor that you would kind of use to encapsulate what these first 5 years on the Muncie campus have been like for you?
So for me, I would say it's been very gratifying. I knew when I was coming here that it was a special opportunity for me. But the rewards that I've received from seeing the successes and the contributions of our faculty, staff, our benefactors, I knew there was a lot of potential for increased impact on the lives of our students and the lives and careers of our graduates and on the communities that we serve. But I underestimated how much momentum and how much impact that we could generate by working together. So it's been rewarding and truly gratifying.
Yeah, I guess, in terms of accomplishments and there'd be several categories, among them, just the physical presence of the campus. Talk about the change that you've seen and shepherded there from any physical changes on the campus.
So over the last 5 years and then continuing over the next 2 or 3, we will have completed somewhere around $400 to $500 million of new construction and renovated construction. So we've built a new health professions building and a new foundational sciences building. Grateful to our elected officials in the General Assembly and to Governor Holcomb for providing the capital for those projects. We've also been able to invest our own resources in 2 new residence halls and a new dining hall that will complete the replacement of the La Follette Hall complex, which was the largest complex. We have a new multicultural center that we've located in the center of campus. We're now constructing a new outdoor performance amphitheater with the extraordinary generosity of one of our graduates, Charlie Brown. We're building a pathway from the village, the commercial district just to the south of our campus, through the heart of our campus. And we're completing the renovation of the Cooper Science Building, and then, of course, our new indoor practice facility. So we've been fortunate with the support of the General Assembly. We've been fortunate in the resources that we have been able to generate internally, and extraordinarily fortunate to have the support of our alumni and benefactors who've made financial contributions that have enabled us to make these investments in our campus.
What's the biggest challenge? I know there are many, but if you had to narrow it down in terms of being a university president today, and certainly all institutions are trying to get, attract students and do things that make their programming, their campus, all of those things more attractive. You mentioned the esports, and I thought that was an interesting announcement you had a few weeks ago. Are all those things aimed at, essentially being a great attractor of students?
Yeah, so probably the biggest challenge from my position is a university has so many constituencies, right? You've got your students, you've got your faculty, you've got your staff, you've got your alumni, you've got elected officials, community leaders, right? And those different constituencies have different perspectives about where the university should be going. And then even within each constituency, right, there isn't a unanimous view. So one of the most important responsibilities I have is to work with all of those constituencies to see if we can harmonize their views into a single plan, single strategic plan. And when that happens, and I think we're in that place now, you've got everyone in the boat rowing in the same direction with the same level of passion and enthusiasm. So that turns that challenge into something that's very rewarding. That's probably the biggest challenge. And then the other challenge now on maybe a less macro level is there is increasing skepticism about the value of higher education. And one of my important responsibilities is to do a better job of communicating with prospective students, with their families, with our community leaders and our elected officials, that investing in higher education, either personally or through state resources, produces and will continue to produce great return on investment.
What I remember when you arrived in Muncie, you talked about the importance of connecting with community, connecting with Muncie, connecting with East Central Indiana. And this is my opinion, like a lot of places, there's not, I don't think, been a great previously relationship town and gown type thing in Muncie with Ball State. And you could say the same thing about other institutions. How would you gauge your success at doing that, at connecting with East Central Indiana to help that economy move forward?
Well, I would start first with Gary that for our institution, first of all, I believe public universities have a community engagement mission, but it is particularly pronounced and true for Ball State. As you know, the history of of our institution traces back to a thriving manufacturing community who made an investment through the Ball brothers and others to create our institution. And now when our community is facing some challenges, it's incumbent upon us to reinvest in the community. So we feel it's both a professional responsibility as well as a moral obligation. So we've done a variety of things, some big and small. We're much more actively involved in the United Way and supporting it both financially and through the United Way Day of Action. Of course, we've taken on this partnership with the Muncie Community Schools, probably the most visible and the most ambitious community engagement project that certainly our university has undertaken, and happy to talk a little bit more about that. But it flows from what's in our institutional interest as well as what our community engagement mission is all about.
Yeah. And I think the opportunity, because I know there was a big announcement just this week as we're taping this podcast with the vertical farming operation out of Minnesota, making a huge investment. I think $70 million when I had 120 jobs for some really high tech kinds of things. It would seem to me that Ball State can be that crown, in a sense, a crown jewel in terms of an asset as Muncie and East Central Indiana go after investment.
That's right. And we have, they often refer to a university like ours as an anchor institution, which I think I understand the terminology, but that sounds like in a time of dynamic change, you don't want to be an anchor.
Right.
You want to be a catalytic agent. And so we're doing that with the Muncie Community Schools. We're doing that with IU Ball Memorial Hospital and the East Central region of IU Health. We want to do that to support population health as well as economic development. We are the arts and culture hub for East Central Indiana. We're proud of that mission as well. So we, as I say, we want to be perceived and welcomed as a catalytic agent here in East Central Indiana.
You talk about your, stepping in with Muncie Community Schools in that whole issue, which was controversial. I mean, you had supporters, certainly, I think a lot in the business community, but others didn't think it was such a great idea. Talk about that whole process as you reflect on it.
So my appointment was announced in January of 2017, and I started work here in May of 2017. In that intervening period was when the state began its takeover of the Muncie Community Schools because of the longstanding systemic challenges. And so it was in the fall of 2017 when we were contacted about the possibility of investing more in the Muncie Community Schools. And we took that responsibility to partner with the Muncie Community Schools for a variety of reasons. One is, we're a teachers college. And frankly, it was a bit of an embarrassment that here we are, one of the premier teachers colleges, not just in the state, but in the Midwest, maybe in the country. Yep. And yet the local public school system was struggling. That's not right. And then, so that was really the professional responsibility. We all know that a strong public school system is what makes a vibrant communities where families want to move and raise their children. So it was in our institutional interest also to support it. But as I said earlier, I felt a moral obligation. And I'll tell you just one quick story, if I may. Mm-hmm. So, we have this beautiful Emmons auditorium on our campus. It was built, President John Emmons, one of my predecessors, raised both state resources as well as philanthropy to build that auditorium. And when I was reading about the history of Ball State in the fall of 2017, I read a story. He went out and raised money from the Ball Brothers foundations and from businesses and wealthy members of the community. But President Emmons also went out to the factories on the south side of Muncie and asked the people on the front line of those factories to make payroll deductions, nickels, dimes, and quarters from their paychecks to support the fundraising campaign that produced Emmons Auditorium. And so it occurred to me when I read that story that the children in the Muncie community schools today, those are the grandchildren and great-grandchildren of those women and men who made those contributions 50 or 60 years ago. We have a moral obligation to repay those extraordinary contributions to support the education of every child here in Muncie, Indiana.
Great story. And we have much more ahead with Ball State University President Geoff Mearns. You're going to enjoy this because this is an interesting guy. I learned a lot in doing research on President Mearns, and we're going to dive into that when the Business and Beyond podcast returns. Stay with us.
First Person Advisors is now a subsidiary of National Financial Partners, the fifth largest insurance broker and consultant in the world. Develop your total reward strategies all in one place with the combination of First Person's local expertise and NFP's global resources and integrated solutions. Learn more at firstpersonadvisors.com.
Welcome back to the Business and Beyond podcast presented by PNC. My guest this week, Ball State University President Geoff Mearns. And Geoff, so much we can talk about. I'm looking forward to this, the second part of our podcast this week, because you have quite an interesting background. Take us all the way back to childhood. So you were born actually in Charlottesville, Virginia, right?
That's correct. My father, yes, I was born in Charlottesville, and my father was on the law faculty at the University of Virginia.
Very good. So ultimately you moved to Ohio. Tell me about the move and when that happened. And that's, I think, where you spent most of your childhood, right?
Correct. We moved throughout the Midwest. We moved from Charlottesville briefly to New York, and then to Chicago, to Evanston, Illinois, and then to Cincinnati, where my father was dean of the law school at Cincinnati. And then They ultimately settled with him working at Case Western Reserve in Cleveland. And we were living in Shaker Heights, a suburb just to the east of Cleveland.
Yeah. Okay. Now, a couple of things on that. One, you are part of a big family, one of 9 children, right? What was growing up like for Geoff Mearns in a family with 9 kids, eight brothers and sisters?
Yeah. So I was the 5th of 9, right in the middle. I had one brother. He was the oldest. And then I had 3 older sisters and 4 younger sisters. So I grew up in a household that was an extension of a family with a long history of strong, smart women. And I've learned in that environment how to keep my mouth shut at times, and also how to navigate competing interests around the dinner table. Leave it that way.
Yeah, that's great. Well, and you talk about strong thinking women, women in leadership. Your mom, I found this interesting, was the first mayor of Shaker Heights, Ohio, right?
That's right. My mother, after she raised the 9 kids, while my youngest sister was still going through elementary school, she served on the Shaker Heights City Council for 10 years and then ran successfully for 2 terms as the mayor of Shaker Heights, the first woman and first full-time mayor of that city.
Well, so how would you describe Geoff Mearns, the high school student? You were an athlete, right? Obviously, you were, I am very confident, very academically successful, but you were also an athlete.
Yeah, I was a decent student and a pretty good runner. So I was an athlete growing up in middle school, high school, all through college, and then competed as a distance runner even for several years after I graduated from college. So distance running, competitive athletics is really kind of a part of who I am.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about your college, because you went to Yale. Was that, did you seriously look at other places? Why Yale?
So I only applied to 3 institutions. I applied to Yale, Virginia, and Duke. Actually, my first choice was to go to the University of Virginia, and they had offered me a scholarship to compete there. Fine institution. But my father had other expectations for me, and we had a long conversation late one night and ultimately made the right decision to attend Yale. It was a great experience for me, challenging academically, great opportunity athletically.
Well, talk about the athletics, because you doing a little research here. You broke Frank Shorter's indoor 2-mile record when you were a freshman at Yale.
Yes, I broke his freshman record. And frankly, he was my idol. I got into distance running by watching Frank Shorter win the gold medal in the Olympics in 1972. I can remember sitting in my TV room in Cincinnati, Ohio, and I turned to my father and I said, that's what I want to do. I want to represent the United States in the Olympics in the marathon. And, throughout the years, my father, who was a very successful athlete himself, said, if that's your dream, here's the work that's required to try to get there.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned the Olympics. You were on a path. You could have done that because you qualified for the Olympic trials, right? For the 84 Olympic trials?
I did. I qualified for the 84 Olympic trials in the marathon. And then, unfortunately, as we know with sports, you've got some ups and you've got some lows. About 5 weeks before the race, it was over Memorial Day weekend of 1984, about 5-6 weeks before the race, I was diagnosed with a stress fracture. So instead of competing in the Olympic trials, I watched it in my apartment on a little black and white TV set. As you can imagine, not the best day in my life.
Yeah. Well, how'd you deal with that? How, people, I always firmly believe that athletics are, the lows and the defeats and the tough times teach you as much, if not more, than the victories and the wins. How did you deal with that?
Well, as I say, it was difficult. It was emotional because it was something that I'd been thinking about, planning for, working for 12 years since I was a 12 or 13-year-old kid. So after the rehabilitation, my father, who was a great role model, said, you got two choices. You can either give up or keep trying. And I kept trying, but never got to that same level. But it learned, as you said just a moment ago, you learn lessons from that. The lesson I learned there is obviously to compete at that level, you have to work very hard, but you also have to understand when to dial it back. And my enthusiasm and my commitment took me to the place where I suffered a stress fracture. So I was trying to find that optimal space. And so I learned to work hard, but also to recognize that there's sometimes you got to take your foot off the gas too.
Yeah. So you were an English major at Yale and then got into teaching, I think, right? Upon graduation?
That's correct. So while at this time when I was training and competing, I was teaching at a private prep school about an hour due west of New York City. The school is called Del Barton in Morristown, New Jersey. And it was a great opportunity for me to professionally, but also gave me the opportunity. The school gave me a lot of support to continue to train.
How about your dad? Obviously, was in law, so that was a natural path. You got your law degree at Virginia.
I did. I then went off to the University of Virginia, where he had gone to law school. Got my law degree there. Had the good fortune of getting into UVA Law School.
So this is where it gets really interesting to me. You got your law degree, and you went to work as a prosecutor. Actually, worked in the Justice Department, right, in New York.
Yes, I was in the U.S. Attorney's Office as part of the Justice Department, the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Eastern District of New York, which is Brooklyn, Queens, Staten Island, and all of Long Island, and was there for about 6 years.
Well, while you were there, you were involved in prosecuting the mob, right? Tell us about that. I mean, some of these, that had to have been an unbelievable experience.
It was a great experience on every level. And I'll spare you the long story, but the Justice Department in January of 1990, shortly after I joined the office, restructured how they were prosecuting organized crime and went from a very centralized approach to a decentralized approach. And so gave the U.S. Attorney's Office, including the one that I was in Brooklyn, much more autonomy and responsibility to prosecute the mob. So the chief of that section at the time was a guy named John Gleason. And like the rest of us, we knew just enough to be aggressive and proactive. And we had a great run there from about 89 to about 1997 in prosecuting traditional organized crime. And most of my cases dealt with the Gambino organized crime family, which is the largest, most dangerous organized crime family in the history of the United States.
What was that like? I mean, for lack of a better, did you ever get scared? I mean, what was that like?
I was probably too young and naive to be scared. It was exciting because John gave us the authority to be aggressive and to take on cases, to challenge ourselves, and to go after. So I tried several cases, racketeering cases, a couple of murder cases. I actually successfully prosecuted the juror who had taken a bribe in the first federal prosecution of John Gotti, successfully convicted him for actually corrupting that jury. So never particularly concerned about our safety because the organized crime in New York, traditional organized crime is a business. And while they're ruthless, they understand there are certain lines that they can't cross. And so never felt particularly concerned for my safety or the safety of my family because they understood that was a bridge too far.
So now, did you cross paths with Rudy Giuliani, because he was obviously, high profile prosecution of the mob as well?
Yeah, Rudy Giuliani was the U.S. attorney in the Southern District in Manhattan, and he had stepped down from that position in the mid to late 80s before I arrived in the U.S. attorney's office in Brooklyn. So never really crossed paths, but certainly knew of him and knew of the work that he and his colleagues had done over in Manhattan in that same area.
Yeah, and prosecuting the mob, one piece of your very interesting law background. Also, Terry Nichols, who involved accomplice, I can't remember the actual technicality, but with the Oklahoma City bombing, you prosecuted Nichols, right?
Yeah, so I had the good fortune, the Attorney General, Janet Reno, in 1997, appointed me to assist with the prosecution of the Oklahoma City bombing cases. It was in the middle of the prosecution of Timothy McVeigh. The two of them, McVeigh and Nichols, were the two co-conspirators that assembled and detonated that bomb. So I was appointed to assist with the second case, which, by the way, there's a tie in here to Indiana because the lead prosecutor in the Nichols case was Larry Mackey.
Right, that's right. Yeah,
here in Indianapolis, and had the good fortune to work with Larry, one of the most extraordinary, capable but dedicated lawyers that I've ever worked with. And in my estimation, I've said this in other settings, he is a true unsung American hero for the commitment that he and his family made to the Oklahoma City bombing cases.
When you got the call from Janet Reno to get involved with that had to be a moment of pride on your part. I mean, were you excited? What were your emotions?
Yeah, so I'll tell you the first story. So I was in the U.S. Attorney's office in Raleigh, North Carolina. I was the first assistant there and had decided privately that I was going to leave the Justice Department and go into private practice in Cleveland, and got a call on a Sunday night from one of the lawyers out in Denver who was prosecuting the case, saying they were looking for somebody. There were 3 attorneys in the first case who were leaving, and they were looking for one experienced prosecutors to fill in. And at that time, we had 3 small children. And so I told the woman who called me, I said, it's just not possible. This was late on a Sunday night. I hung up the phone and my wife asked me, Jennifer said, who was that? What was it about? And I told her, and she said, well, what did you tell her? I said, well, it's just not possible. I can't be considered doing that. I've got 3 little kids. It's just not possible. And to her credit, Jennifer said, call her back. She said, this is who you are. This is what you do. If the Attorney General decides that you're the person best capable of representing the United States in this case, we'll figure the rest of it out. Yeah. And so within about 2 or 3 weeks, I was spending 2 to 3 weeks at a time in Denver, Colorado, while my wife was packing up our house in North Carolina, moving our 3 small children to Cleveland. Mm-hmm. While I was commuting back and forth, Jennifer became pregnant with twins. So she was at home with 3 kids under the age of 6 and pregnant with twins when I was living in a hotel in Denver, Colorado. I share that story because there were so many of us who had family members, spouses, and others while we were deployed by the Justice Department there, who were raising our families and were doing extraordinary service to our country outside of the limelight and focus. And Jennifer and my kids were among that very special group.
Wow. So how did you veer off and to get on that university president path from law to education?
So after I returned back to Cleveland just in time for Jennifer to have those twins, I was in private practice in Cleveland for about 7 years with a couple of different large national and international law firms in Cleveland when I was invited to apply to be the dean of the law school at Cleveland State, and had the good fortune to be selected as the dean there. I thought I would do that just as an interlude, maybe do that for 4 or 5 years. I believe in education. I believe in our justice system, believe in public service. So again, I thought I would do that for 5 or 6 years and then get back into law practice, maybe go back to be a prosecutor, and went down this path and have been on this path ever since. And feel incredibly fortunate that the president of Cleveland State at the time, Mike Schwartz, gave me an opportunity. I was a non-traditional candidate, so to speak. The only time I had spent in law school was as a student and as an adjunct. And for him to give me the shot to to be the dean of a law school. He took a big chance on me, and I'm grateful that he did.
Yeah, well, you had an opportunity to elevate to the president's office at Northern Kentucky University, right? So you served that where your service preceded your arrival at Ball State. What was the experience at Northern Kentucky like? How did that prepare you for what you're doing at Ball State?
Yeah, Northern Kentucky University is a fine institution. It's just across the river from Cincinnati. It's in the Cincinnati metropolitan area. It's a relatively young institution, only now about 50 years old. Serves a high percentage of commuter students, but has both undergraduate and graduate programs. It was a good opportunity for me to appreciate what it was like to be a university president and why it's both gratifying as well as challenging.
Well, as you look kind of out into the future, what's next at Ball State? I mean, you've got so many things going on there on campus with academic programs and others. What would you like to accomplish in these next several years at Ball State?
So we have a long-term strategic plan that looks out all the way to 2040, but we're in the first phase of that, which is implementing strategic initiatives through 2024. I would say three things probably are significant or noteworthy. One is, and with respect to undergraduate students who are on campus, an increasing investment and focus on experiences. You know, Gary, if we in education are simply delivering content, we will be out of business, right? Our students can get all of the content that they need on their cell phone, on their smartphone in 5 minutes. So our faculty are continuing to make the appropriate transition to not delivering content, but to providing learning experiences where students can apply the content that they have received to real world problems. We call it immersive learning, and we do that in many respects.
Yeah, and I just want to jump in there, Geoff, because I think Ball State has really been a leader in that regard, right? The immersive learning, that experiential learning, that's kind of been to me anyway, seems to be part of the Ball State brand and has been for a while.
Yes, and all credit, not all credit, a lot of credit goes to Joanne Gora for seeing, the famous line, Wayne Gretzky's famous line, I don't skate to where the puck is, I skate to where it's going. And that was Joanne Gora. She saw this. So we're accelerating down that pathway. The second thing that we're beginning to invest more in is lifetime learning, non-degree credentials, maybe non-credit courses, certificates, and the like, things that will help people continue advance professionally or will enrich their lives personally. So we're making significant investments in this area of lifetime learning. And then the third piece, as we talked about earlier, is continuing to expand our investments and engagement with the communities that we serve, Muncie, Delaware County, and all of East Central Indiana. So I'd say those are the three areas where you're going to continue to see greater impact here of our university, all focused on how our students contribute in those areas.
Well, Geoff Mearns, it has been a real treat to have you on my podcast. You are an interesting fellow. I've really enjoyed the conversation, and I've enjoyed watching you in a leadership role at Ball State, because the university obviously is so important, not only for Muncie and East Central Indiana, but for the entire state. So thank you for the time, and I look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you for giving me this opportunity, and thanks you for all that you do for the great state of Indiana.
All right. Thanks very much, Geoff. And thank you for joining us on this edition of the Business and Beyond podcast. It is a weekly conversation with achievers in business, sports, entertainment, and beyond. And you can download it and also catch up on all of our previous episodes. All you have to do is go to InsideIndianaBusiness.com and click on the subscribe tab. You can also get business news 24/7 while you're there. Thanks for joining us. I'm Gary Dick. We'll see you next time.